Good morning, Gaston. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about leadership and your contribution to our session in the World Retail Congress. We have experienced one of the most challenging times for the retail industry, not only because the entire ecosystem has changed, but also because the way teams are working is different and it's demanding other skills and traits. For this session, we have prepared some questions that from a leadership perspective will guide us in understanding which have been your main learnings during this year of the pandemic and which are the new skills you and your team have developed in order to face the challenges the industry is facing. Okay, so maybe we can start from a brief talk about what is Falabella and the main businesses in which the company is today. We would love to hear that first.
Great. Well, thank you, Juan Pablo, for having me and being part of the World Retail Congress. Yes, I think starting with a brief description of who we are, Falabella is at heart a retailer, but we operate a set of different businesses that are all very related to each other. So we operate three formats or three retail formats: home improvement, department stores, and grocery. We also have a real estate or commercial real estate division where we mostly operate shopping malls. And we have a very developed financial business that was born as the credit card, as a proprietary credit card in our stores, and eventually developed into a full-fledged banking operation, very focused on personal finance and payments. I think that's the core of our business, and as every other retailer, we are also in a process of transformation and development of the business, in which I would say there are two main new businesses that we are growing and that are considered our speedboats, sort of. One of them is the payment business. So we are, in addition to the financial business, developing wallet capabilities and payment processing capabilities that we think are going to be very important going forward to support the ecosystem we are building. And the other one is a marketplace business, which was started with our acquisition of a regional marketplace called Linio, and over the last 2 years has grown into a sizable marketplace operation with focus in our main markets, which are basically the Andean markets: Chile, Peru, Colombia, and also some presence in Brazil, Mexico, Uruguay, and Argentina. So that would be the overall description of the businesses. I'd say in addition to that business perspective, there is the more horizontal view of how we're transforming from a business that was set up to basically build real estate, commercial real estate, and develop these synergies around product sales, transactions, and customer relationships, around a more subscription model in the financial business, and transform that into digital platforms that are supporting these formats, but that are also operating horizontally as ways to allow customers to shop much more seamlessly across what historically were much more vertical retail formats. And in that sense, what we are developing is much more of a open marketplace with our own retailers, but also with third-party retailers participating, and thus allowing us to grow at a much faster pace than we have done historically, with a much lower level of fixed asset investment.
Great, perfect. Thank you for that. Going to deeply in what leadership has how leadership has changed during this year. During COVID-19, how have you been communicating what you stand for, your purpose, your vision, your values? And in that same line, what is the same or different to pre-COVID? I mean, what are the things that are the same, and what are the things that have changed?
Great. So look, what we state we stand for, because we have such a set of diverse businesses, even though they are all customer-oriented businesses and they're all in the realm of retail, is that our objective with all of these businesses is to simplify the lives of our customers, and that objective is supported by very well-defined values within the organization around result orientation and really making accomplishments over time, and people growing as a result of those accomplishments, which results into a very meritocratic culture within the company. And those things really is what hasn't changed with the pandemic, but what it takes to make those things reality is what really has changed, and simplifying the life of our customers in the context of a crisis like the one we had in 2020 and are continuing to live in the beginning of 2021 really means you need to adapt the way we communicate and keep customer relationships alive. And that means I'll give a few examples. We have 500 stores, of which are in the region of which a large percentage were closed at any point in time, which means our digital channels became our main way of interaction with customers, and a lot of our sales moved to our digital channels, to the point that in the probably most critical point of the crisis, we were reaching levels of sales that were around 80% of our total sales of a year before, but they were all being done in digital channels. The impact of that is that our whole operation had to adapt, and it became a very big challenge to adapt the technology, adapt the logistics, and adapt our customer service channels in a context where we had challenges around, people not being able to go to our distribution centers, or us not being able to go across the different parts of different countries with trucks, etc. So I think what changed really is the stress that the organization had to go through during that time translated into very rapid decision making, into a much more agile way of working. And I'd say that's what's going to change. And I think today, as we are in a much more, even though we're still suffering some of the impacts of the pandemic, we are in a much more stable situation in terms of stores being opened and customers returning to a much more, quote, quote, normal life. Many of those things around what changed in our way of working remain. And I think most of that has to do with the speed with which we adapt to changes in customer behavior.
Okay. And regarding your team, your core team, what did change regarding the way you communicate with them, the way you motivate them, you connect them with the business?
I think the most relevant change is the frequency of interactions. I'd say that we became as a team a lot more informal, even though we have the formality of having to set up Zoom meetings and manage an agenda that, because there was less physical interaction, became more rigid. but at the same time, we made a real effort to increase the frequency of interactions because the speed of decision making had to increase substantially. I think the other thing that we changed and that we were forced by the context to change was the flexibility. People had different types of constraints around mobility or around being close to parts or to their family and therefore displaced to the geographies where we operate. And I think that forced us to build in a lot of flexibility so people could continue to operate given different types of constraints. And I think also that is something that is going to remain going forward because we learned that we can offer a lot of flexibility and still be operative. And therefore, that changes your mindset around the trade-off between having the best person and the ability of that person to either be physically present or be present 100% of the time, at the work time, etc. So you build in a lot of more of flexibility, which gives you access to a lot more talent and allows you to keep talented people in the team. That's also, I think, something that changed. And I think the other thing that changed is that we put a real effort into looking beyond the pandemic and making sure that the adaptations we make in our organization, in our cost structure, in our logistics, in our technology, are changes that are not only designed to improve our performance during the pandemic, but they are designed for the long-term performance of the business. And I think that was very relevant in changing our mindset and not being focused only in the short term, because the pandemic, on one hand, accelerated a lot of decision making, but on the other hand, by keeping that long-term perspective, we made sure that that decision making that didn't mean we were somehow, putting the long term at risk, which is a very big risk when you're reacting to a crisis.
Great. Let's move to our second question. How are you keeping up with pace of change and aligning your people, teams, and your resources to deliver value to your customers and drive your business? And in the same line, what has worked well and what has worked less well? What will you stop doing, start, or continue doing in the future?
So I'd say that the main focus that we placed in the process of going through the pandemic was making sure that, given that levels of transaction and interaction with the customer changed drastically, that we focus more on the relationship and keeping that relationship. And that was that is a shift when you're coming from a very dynamic and somehow set commercial plan with all of your channels and your team, and you have to look more at, okay, the customer is not going to demand the same types of products. Our team is not going to demand the same types of support. So how do we focus on the long term in these interactions? And some of and I think one of I'd give you 2 or 3 examples. One of the focus was the focus on efficiency. Given the contraction in demand, that is therefore has to translate in how do you adjust your cost structure to make sure you can go through a crisis and still be alive at the other end of it. And I'd say we put a lot of emphasis on adaptation of the organization and simplifying the organization rather than just reducing the organization. And that translated into more agile decision making, which we are now seeing a lot of the fruit of taking that approach. The other adaptation that I think was very relevant is, okay, we have all of these square meters in our stores. This is producing a drastic change in customer behavior. How does that change the role of our stores going forward? You know, from simply a sales point to a service point and to a showroom for product rather than a sales point. And therefore, what type of stores do we need to build going forward, including the remodeling of our own stock of stores, and what is the role of stores going forward, and which ones have a place in our portfolio and which ones don't, and therefore do we need to change the number of stores that we have. All of that questioning, I think, really changed our perspective of the balance between growing through building new stores versus growing through reinforcing and developing new digital channels, you know, which is an obvious trend, but it requires a lot of detailed thinking about how you're going to actually make that transition and make both successful. So make the digital channels successful and the physical channels successful. And I think something we learned is that historically in that process, we had always a perspective of cannibalization, of one channel losing sales and the other gaining sales, and the top line not really growing at a fast rate as a result of that. And I think this questioning of our own operation resulted in our ability to grow both at the same time. And I think our expectation going forward and the way we are viewing the development of those two channels is that they reinforce each other rather than cannibalize each other, which means you're thinking about the channels differently. So those are some of the things, you know, to your question that I think really worked. Mm-hmm. I think when you ask what, you know, didn't work, I think is we had to speed up decision making in a major way, and initially that didn't really work. You know, initially that was difficult for us because the change of pace was too great given what, you know, we were structured and you know what we were structured to do. So I think we had an initial period of adaptation that translated into service levels that were not where we wanted them to be, translated into movement of product or development of inventories in places where we didn't need them. So I think we learned a lot from that, but those were some of the things that initially in the initial stages of the pandemic didn't really work out.
Okay. And okay, so are you okay with the answer so far? Would you like to change something? O sea, ¿te gustaría cambiar algo? ¿Está todo bien? ¿Para seguir grabando?
No sé.
No,
creo que sí, ¿no?
Sí, no, está bien, ¿no? Sí, te pregunto a ti. Sí, en el fondo, lo que estamos haciendo acá es vamos a ir cortando cada pregunta y después para que ellos, al editar, ellos sepan que la pregunta está bien y todo bien.
Ya. ¿Pero a ti te parecieron bien o la pregunta tiene
no,
okay.
Perfecto. No, te preguntaba a ti si te sentías como, ya.
No,
okay.
Yo creo que sí.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's move to our third question. Gaston, how are you engaging and energizing your teams and continuing to build trust at a time when in-person interactions are far more limited?
Well, I think I will go back to part of the initial, the first question, which is the frequency of interactions has really increased. I think you know, as much as there are many disadvantages to us not being able to go to the office, we have the advantage of you know, I can set up a breakfast with 20, 30, 50 people, and I do that on a regular basis, which allows you to get input from a lot of people, which in a physical setting is difficult to do. We have a regional footprint in all of Latin America. Now it has become a lot easier, for example, to have a meeting with, you know, or a breakfast with people from stores in many different parts of the region at the same time. So I think actually the pandemic has brought me a lot more opportunities for interaction with medium-sized groups of people and getting a lot of input. So on one hand, I instituted a daily meeting with my team. It was unthought of to have a daily meeting, but now with Zoom, you just can have a 20-minute daily meeting where you look at, what have we learned from in the last 24 hours? What's new? Is there anything we need to change? And that has really kept us very close as a team. It has had the impact of keeping us very close as a team. And at the same time, I could reach out to the fringes of the organization and get a lot of input about what's happening and how people are feeling, and therefore react to that actually in a much more systematic way than I had done previously. I think also we did something that was a little bit of a coincidence, but was very helpful. We had been working for about a year in launching what we called the Falabella Academy, or Academia Falabella, which is basically a two-pronged professional development initiative. On one hand, the Falabella Academy was designed to have training for managers around the main aspects of our business, and most of our training being offered by our own managers with the support of external faculty and some, speakers, etc. So things like logistics, technology, data analytics. But at the same time, the Falabella Academy had the objective of giving the opportunity to people that are in different roles today to make a change to roles that have very high demand going forward, like web design or basic development roles, technology development roles. And so we had the process of developing this Falabella Academy, and it was designed to operate physically. And we took the advantage of many people being in their homes and having, therefore, more flexibility to participate in these types of initiatives. And we launched the Falabella Academy digitally, with a lot of, as I said, participation from the leaders of the organization, and also the second part, obviously, in association with organizations that specialize in aspects like web design, development, etc. And it was a great success in the sense that it allowed a lot of people in the organization, thousands of people, to become actually more connected to where we are going, our strategy, our main levers as a company, than they were before. So that was, I think, another example of something that, a little bit by coincidence, but worked out very well to keep the organization much more connected and much more informed and excited about what's going on at the company.
Great. Okay, so let's move to our fourth question. COVID-19 has introduced a need for agility like never before. Actually, you were talking about that in previous answers. How are you adapting to a constantly changing context? How are you thinking about applying these lessons for the longer term?
Yeah, so I think I like to use an example around agility that is not so much about how fast you do things, but how early you learn about how you are doing or the impact of what you're doing. And I think what is changing, not only as a result of the pandemic, but I think as a result of technology mostly, is that the cost of errors is really decreasing. So just to give an example, if we misplace an escalator in a store, that mistake is very, very expensive, and it's almost impossible to change. But if we misplace a banner, if we misplace or the product listing page is not well done, we can change that in 5 minutes. Not only that, but we can have 2 product listing pages that have different design being presented at the same time. That was impossible to do in a store. So what I'm trying to communicate with that is the cost of error is really, really low, and the value of the mistake is very high compared to the cost of error. And that is really the way I look at Agile, is that we need to change that mindset, and traditional companies are very anchored in an equation where the cost of error is very high and the value of the error is not so high because you cannot correct it so easily. In a context where you can correct errors very easily, the value of the error is extremely high because you learn from it and you can apply that learning immediately. So the whole cultural change I think that we are going through, and the pandemic has really accelerated, is how do we make more mistakes and learn from them more proactively and be less defensive about the fact that we made a mistake, because actually that mistake is a valuable asset to us rather than something you should be ashamed of. And I think that is the big cultural change that all more traditional, retail companies, or actually in any sector, companies are going through. And we're trying to go through that as fast as possible, and encourage people to move to this mindset as fast as possible. I think that goes hand in hand with changing from a mindset of you have a function and you have a role, and you have to make sure that function and that role is well executed. If you are in risk, that's your role. You have to minimize risk. If you are in commercial, you have to maximize sales. And all of these people in the organization have these conflicting roles that provide you a balance between objectives. We have to change that from working around objectives themselves. What do we want to accomplish? We want to accomplish a better customer experience. Well, then we need to have teams that have risk embedded in them, that have the commercial team embedded in them, that have the technology team embedded in them, and that have the autonomy to make this experience better. And that's the other aspect of agility that we are pushing. And I think the pandemic has really helped us push, because we were forced to make these changes very fast. And therefore, you start developing teams that are more horizontal, that are less divided into silos, and that have common objectives and autonomy to make those objectives or those goals happen. I'd say those two things, the value of mistakes and relative to their costs, and the autonomy of teams to actually make things happen, are the two most drastic changes that the pandemic has brought to our organization that are helping us move forward at a much faster pace.
Great. Qué buena respuesta, me encantó. Buenísimo. Gaston, many organizations and leaders have found new sources of inspiration and innovation driven by necessity during the pandemic. Has your team experienced this? If so, what observations can you share about that?
Yes, I think that statement is absolutely right. And I think our team experienced that at two levels. And they are not, I think I hear a lot of discussion about whether innovation comes from the ground or where it comes from the leadership, and it actually needs to come from both. And I think the pandemic produced a lot of innovation on both ends, or at all levels of the organization. And I think at the leadership level, this increased frequency and intensity of interaction allowed us to be much more in sync, and therefore create a lot more together and come up with ideas of how to either manage internal challenges like work flexibility, or how to support people working from their homes in a better way, how to support people that had challenges either in their family or in their workplace, because we are a retail organization that serves customers, and therefore physical interaction when stores are open becomes a very important concern for all of our people. So we had to solve all of those problems as a management team, and I think having this high frequency of interaction really helped. But also we had a lot of examples of people, you know, and I like to tell you about one which was very interesting. We had a tech developer that was from Venezuela and was visiting his family when the pandemic broke and was unable to come back to Chile. So he was locked up in Venezuela alone, basically. And this person came up with a solution for how to accept payments for products or payments of our credit card with people without logging in. Because one of the challenges we had is our onboarding or digital onboarding of customers, you know, was was partial. So we don't have 100% of our customers with their authentication and password and all of the credentials set up. So we had to solve that problem. So our customer base, particularly those that are less digitally or less comfortable with technology, could interact and do things when they could not move from their homes. And this person solved that problem from his home in Venezuela and came up with a prototype. And then it turned out, you know, he built a team with people that working in other areas of the organization. But he took the initiative in a situation where he was unable to come back to Chile because of a particular situation. And I think we can count tens of those examples within the organization of products or solutions that were created by people who, you know, just could not be working in their normal 8-hour periods or whatever, and had time to come up with creative solutions that became very impactful for the organization.
Great. Amazing. And finally, Gaston, what is the one thing you have learned about leadership over these last few months?
One thing, I think the most relevant lesson I've taken is that the phrase that crises are an opportunity is not a cliche. You know, that really the crisis was very challenging, but it became an incredible opportunity for me personally, for the management team, and for the whole organization to make changes and to make decisions that maybe we had thought about or had the intuition that they were in the right direction, but our own pace was not allowing us to, or our own inertia was not allowing us to make those more profound decisions. And I think during 2020, if you take it in historical perspective, is probably the year when we as a company made more relevant decisions than any time before, and long-term impact decisions, in spite of the fact that we were trying to survive a very short-term crisis, you know, because in the big scheme of things, the pandemic is really a short-term crisis. So I think the most important lesson about leadership that I took is always look at the long term, even if you have a crisis that is forcing you to really focus on the short term, and use that crisis actually as an opportunity to accelerate that long-term decision making.
Great, great. Well, Gaston, I think we should be closing. Time has gone very fast during this conversation. I really appreciate it. It has been very insightful and interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time, for your willingness to talk with us, And for sure, all these learnings you have shared with all of us will be of important value for several managers that are facing new and evolving challenges. So thank you, Gaston, a lot. It's always a pleasure, and see you in the next one.
Juan Pablo, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to participate in the interview. It was great talking to you, and thank you.